let's take a look at some of the best performing robots in the rebuild season and take a look at how they're designed, how they're performing in different world record matches, and then how you can take some of these designs and apply them to your own robot to improve your design for the rebuild season. I'm Brogan Pratt, and I've been teaching robotics design for over a decade now. And we're going to take a look at a couple of different recent world record matches that have been coming out of some of the regions in the United States, getting upwards of 700 points. We'll talk about what kind of strategy your team might be able to employ. And then let's also talk about how some of these designs are changing from shooter versus some of these drum-based designs. First off, let's take a look at the current world record just to get an idea on what kind of robots are starting to really start taking away some of the score here. The team to focus on here is Team Red, and particularly 1678, Team Citrus Circuits, and 5940, which is Team Bread, I believe. So we'll take a look at their autonomous first, and we see that teams are really trying to crash in aggressively into that first stage as well. And it seems like some of the top teams are now able to come back and scooch for a couple different sections. One thing that's not clear at the moment is on our Citrus Circuits team here, on whether they have some sort of camera-based vision system that is allowing them to be able to grab different pools of some of these artifacts. But what is clear coming up is both of these teams, both Team Bread as well as Team Citrus Circuits, have very large hoppers that are able to expand quite wide. We see that Citrus Circuits has an expandable hopper that can lift itself up and down to be able to get through that sort of low bridge, but also be able to go back over that bump. And to be able to, one, have a huge hopper design. We've seen this before. And then two, to be able to unload a large amount of fuel rather quickly. So we'll take a look at just how quickly it's able to unload some of that fuel. And as we unload in, that is a volley of close to 40 to 50 fuel inside just one round there from that team over there. And then similarly with a very large section here. Now, one thing we're going to see a lot of is this drum shooter versus a turret shooter. And I think with the Team Bread, there is still quite a high throughput on this robot, but it does have two shooters or two turrets on that as well. I've seen some teams have three shooters on some of their designs. And I think this is really one of those things that high throughput really is winning this rebuild season. And if we skip forward a little further into the match here, if we can get to the last 20 seconds, we can see we're upwards of 648 points for Team Red here. I believe the final score ends up being around 730, 740 by the time everything is all said and done. So it really comes down to the improvement and that important critical piece of really high throughput. So what kind of other designs are really starting to do some of that throughput? And how might you be able to get some of that higher throughput in as well? Some things that we're seeing in terms of this throughput here, if we took a look at Team Ninja's 4744, as well, they've got a little double dip here in their autonomous, so they're able to pick up a lot, fire in again, and then be able to fire, come back over that bump again, grabbing or underneath that bridge, being able to go grab, coming back around again, grabbing more of that fuel, coming back in, and then firing that back up into that hub as well. So we're seeing that some of these, and as we continue on these matches, really high throughput is really doing that again. We've got match 7 here from the California district, Silicon Valley. And again, let's take a look at this. And the alliance to watch is, again, the Red Alliance here, talking about 254, as well as 9470. And some of their just really high throughput designs. I believe that as the time of recording, this is the second or third highest world record. I believe that Team Citrus and Breads holds the 2 current world records, and this is world record number 3, at least at this time of recording. But we see that really high throughput really is starting to take away with some of that. Just being able to force out a huge amount of fuel, not really, well, I guess it was actually rather surprising to a good chunk of these teams as we start going to this, because there was an early debate in the FRC season talking about whether a turreted shooter is going to win or whether a drum shooter is going to win. It looks, at least in the early season, that a drum-based shooter is really starting to take away with that. And I think one of the important things is the ability just to unload an insane amount of fuel really rather quickly, and particularly at the start of the season when there's not being a lot of defense played. And what I think you're going to see a lot of in this season here is, let's come back to the Blue Alliance section. I want you to take a look at what 6665 does here, and taking a look at some of the dedicated defense that they start being played once the hub starts switching out of that first initial sections here. Now that the blue hub is active, you now see that 6665 is now starting to play a lot more defense over here in this back corner, pushing that robot out. One thing that I think is going to probably be really critical for some of these robots that have these more turret-based systems, and if you do end up having a turret-based system, is being able to play a lot more defense with your robot, and then being able to shoot and move. And that's really one of the big benefits here of having a single turret or a dual turret robot. Is right now what 6665 can be doing is they could be grabbing all of this fuel that's up in that far side and launching it back into that neutral zone, because we see teams, at least in this early section, they're starting to try to take some of their fuel in here and launch it back into their respective sections so that they can end up being able to collect a lot more. So if you can have a team member here playing dedicated defense, if they are able to push robots out of the way and then also fire and shoot in on the move and get some of that fuel back into that central kind of neutral zone, I really think that that's going to be some sort of strategy that's really going to start taking off and could really start improving some of these teams that may not have as high throughput, but still allow them to be able to play rather effectively in that game. It does seem to me like this is one of those games where having two robots with a high throughput and then one robot that is sort of herding things back and then playing more dedicated defense is really going to help out this season, particularly when those hubs are getting a little bit more active. And we're seeing that a little more here. We've got a few other robots here talking about their different shooter design and talking about their throughput. So we've got Team 3966 Griffin Command here. Again, we see that this is a single turret style as well as with the lift, which is good. When we talk about things with the lift, I think that teams that have these individual turrets might make it more likely for them to be able to fire while they are on top of that lift. And I think that will be a really beneficial thing for teams to be able to do. But you can just see the difference in the throughput of a single turret versus a drum-based shooter. And a single-based turret, unless you can get a really high throughput for that flywheel and start pushing things through, is still quite low. For instance, if we take a look at, where was it here? So we've got the team Brembrands, and they have a turret-based shooter, of course, coming here from the Netherlands, like myself here, and we can see that the throughput, even with a relatively high throughput shooter that they're able to get to, the amount of volume in which they can unload fuel into that hub is just not near as high as getting something like a drum-based shooter. So potentially adding in a second turret there, something like Bread is doing, would be really beneficial for being able to get some of the higher throughput. And I really think that in this FRC season, we can really look to what the FTC guys have been doing this season a lot, and looking at how high throughput really seems to be winning that season. Similar thing here. And we may have some, in some of these qualifying and regional events, we do have a bit of fuel starvation going on some sections, but FIRST is open to adding in more fuel as we get further on in the season for regionals and then for championships as well, that we might have less chances of things being more fuel dry or fuel sort of drying up inside of that section here. Similar, we've got Sophia with 1699 here with another drum-based shooter, and talking about just the importance of getting that high throughput. So you have a drum-based shooter here, but you really do need to have a way of feeding more of that fuel. And it looks like that drum is capable of moving in, but perhaps this kicker is not on a high enough RPM to be able to get it closer into that drum as well. Something that I think is going to be really beneficial for some of these drum-based shooters here is what Team 3255 is doing here. And they've got a angled hood. The thing about having a drum-based shooter is that you can't really shoot and move, because unless you have ability to change the angle like Team 3255 is able to do here, you don't really have an ability to modulate the RPM fast enough that if you get hit or if you're moving and trying to move while you're shooting, you don't really have the ability to change the distance of your shots. Whereas adding in something like a moving hood will allow you to be able to get some of those sections in. So really think about how you modulate those hoods. And in my opinion, just getting a wide drum, I think that's really something we're seeing really early on in the season, is just how dominant that strategy ends up being, is just getting a whack load of fuel in there, particularly when teams haven't figured out how to play defense yet. and haven't been running around in those far sections, being able to steal some of that fuel, really focused on getting their own points as opposed to getting things back in neutral zone for their own teams to be able to factor things back in as well. Last thing I don't want to leave off here is when teams are doing things like lifts here, I think that these turret-based shooters are going to be very beneficial in being able to get those ranking points, particularly in those qualifying rounds, to be able to lift themselves up to a level 1 rank, or level 1 lift, sorry, and then be able to fire while they are on top of that turret. Because as far as my understanding goes, there's nothing saying that you can't load up your hopper, lift yourself up on that turret, and then fire in for all your lifting yourselves up. So while you won't get a whack load of points, being able to load up a huge hopper and unload a lot, it does allow you to lift yourselves up, get your team some of those ranking points for moving towards that tower, to be more likely being one of those captains to be able to pick out those alliances as well. Curious about your thoughts on where you think this season has been going and how you've been seeing this kind of turret versus high throughput, and whether you agree with where my thoughts are at on turrets and the importance of getting a second turret in there, potentially even a third turret in there, like I've seen some teams do, just to be able to get some higher throughput through inside of that session, because throughput, in my opinion, really is winning some of those matches. Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, best of luck out there this rebuild season.